A Birbalsingish American notes the decline of reading. Partly disagreeing, I build on what she says. This is more to develop perspective on my own thought, rather than preaching politics that usually draws more attention. Although political implications are huge, I doubt many will persevere. For all their seeking truth, most philosophers are arrogant, assuming that what they say is worth the time of others sufficiently generous to listen. And I'm no exception. If you get to the end, I thank you. In the 18th century, it was common to sentences extending across 2 and sometimes 3 paragraphs, using semicolons instead of full stops. Periods, I think, is the word in US English. And semicolons are all but extinct in modern publishing. Clauses are less common, and commas are on the retreat. Short sentences hammer out bite-sized lumps as meaning turns digital. The landscape perspective of longer sentences consigned to history, because people are no longer taught how to appreciate them. Grammar was once considered important to order words, phrases, clauses, sentences and paragraphs. Chapters and books identified themselves by breaks similar to stopping overnight on the way or journeys in their entirety. Today, focus on grammar is often taken as an oppressive, unnecessary attitude, damaging natural creativity, imagination and the understanding of children. This is backed up by the popular belief in educare, meaning that you don't teach children by giving them tools, as it were, forcing what you think into them, but you draw out what is already there, as if somehow by magic the whole panoply of the world is born in them at birth, and a teacher is there just to ease it out, rather like toothpaste from a tube, I suppose. Anyway, all of a sudden, sometime in the 20th century, grammar became political. Why? I have a YouTube link in the transcript which relates to the presentation which stimulated me to write this, and she refers in there to The Age of Reading is Over by Rose Horowitz, which appears behind a paywall in the Atlantic, and certainly my take on it from what she says, it's well worthwhile trying to get a hold of a copy of that. Anyway, she suggests that libraries of antiquity were not deliberately destroyed, but succumbed through negligence, failing to maintain and look after them, which begs the question as to what caused tolerance of such neglect, and how come writings were no longer considered worth saving. She starts by observing that writing in long sentences increasingly restricts the number capable of grasping the meaning, because many have been taught to be incapable of understanding them. In a survey to check out this sort of thing, the first few lines from Bleak House were used to test comprehension, or the lack of it. This is a fairly long paragraph, but I'm going to read it anyway. Chapter 1, In Chancery, London. Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Implacable November weather. As much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth. And it would not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus, 40 foot long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill, smoke lowering down from chimney pots, making a soft black drizzle with flakes of soot in it as big as full-grown snowflakes gone into the morning, one might imagine, to the depth of the sun. Dogs, undistinguishable in mire, horses, scarcely better, splashed to their own very blinkers. Foot passengers jostling one another's umbrellas in a general inflection of ill temper, and losing their foothold at street corners where tens of thousands of other foot passengers had been slipping and sliding since the day broke, if the day ever broke, adding new deposits to the crust upon crust of mud sticking at those points tenaciously to the pavement and accumulating at compound interest. Unaware of the reference to the flood, some who were taking this test were all at sea. Perhaps they thought Dickens was suggesting prehistoric creatures wandering around central London. As for the metaphor of mud accumulating at compound interest, with the additional connotation about financial ways of the time lurking at the end of the paragraph, I doubt many would have the slightest idea. I understand the problem, experienced something worse than whole word teaching. My luck was to start with phonetics, a la Birbalsingish, and at the age of about 4 or 5, following the educational fashion of the late 1950s and early 60s, I was transferred to whole word. Although technical books and manuals were no problem, fluent reading of long sentences, especially when encountering unfamiliar words, was beyond me. Where the process of reading should be thoughtless, like ordering your muscles in walking, words did not speak to me. I had to extort meaning from them. In my early 50s, Dickens was open to me after relearning how to understand written language. Then I read most of his major works in a few months, when before they were closed books uselessly taking up space on the shelf. You can see books piled up behind me because, ironically, certainly unintentionally, I'm going through, along with my partner Lorna, a bit of a purge of the small library we have in that bookcase. Writings are preserved if they're considered worth preserving. But if knowledge conflicts with politics, if it's liable to give people ideas above their station, authoritarian instincts to engineer obedience justify the destruction of libraries for the sake of social domination and control. Neglect could have been a convenient disguise for deliberate destruction. Disappearance of the majority of libraries across the US and the UK over the last half-century may have been politically convenient, as if part of a program to eradicate democracy by stealth. After all, if you can't understand, it's increasingly difficult to cast a vote without succumbing to the impotence of unintended consequences. Contrary to popular myth that voters should not be allowed to vote because they're not educated, etc., the point is they vote for people who they feel, maybe from experience, are likely to be on their side. Even quite stupid people are capable of realizing that deteriorating roads, a typical sign of slide towards a failed state, are a sign that something is seriously going wrong. The idea that somehow education necessarily confers moral superiority and ignorance immorality is crass, as if evil scientists and academics never existed. Anyone who's experienced sometimes quite vile behaviour of academic internal politics can testify how unpleasant potential immorality can lurk in institutions dedicated to preserve and further knowledge. Wild enthusiasm of mid-20th century German academia for the politics of the time, then home to the greatest universities in the world, is further evidence. The tragedy was to see this outstanding intellectual leadership in places like Heidelberg utterly destroyed, never to recover since the ideological World War. Phonetics has weaknesses, for sure. just as does whole word. It's not beyond the ken of an average person to think it's worth combining the strengths of both, abandoning the futile and often stupid either-or academic war between them. But both are incomplete in that they appear to ignore how meaning is created from combination of letters, words, phrases, clauses, sentences, paragraphs. They can swap round places, chapters, books, and even on to libraries and cultures. Also, both seem to ignore how grammar is used to clarify groups of words intended to combine to produce meaning. One moment, I want to just go on to a bit of editing. Bear with me a minute. Put an S on there. Groups of words intended to combine to produce meaning. An added feature is that single letters are meaningless. When combined, a word expresses a meaning, as if by metamorphosis. Following on, a small group of words combines to metamorphose into another meaning, which is not the sum of the meaning of the words that created it. The process continues all the way to culture via sentences, paragraphs, chapters, etc. The ability to express meaning in a non-logical way is key to freedom of thought, and one form of human creativity, another being invention, where a combination and metamorphosis of utility behave in a similar manner. I've written about other forms of metamorphosis elsewhere. This is hugely important. Words are not meaning and don't refer to some strange heaven of concepts. If they did exist, concepts are static and so cannot combine and metamorphose. They are meaningless throwback to Plato and a very different school from Socrates, the last gasp, a great Minoan philosopher. In some respects, Western philosophy was all downhill after Plato, the archetypal authoritarian apologist. Hemlock was never going to be his cup of tea. Let us make words with meaning and combinations of meanings make other meaning. Words are not the meaning they make and convey. Imprecise, culturally blinkered and highly educated academics will find this very hard to grasp. Tools are not what they make. I have a lathe in my garage. For want of time and courage, I have not used it yet to make things. If only tools were what they make, it would save me a lot of bother. Meanwhile, I like to think I'm not that blinkered or stupid. In the case of highly educated people, usually artificially stupid, which makes it worse, because they have talent which should be used properly. Two wrongs don't make a right in non-logic. We can be right for the wrong reasons. Because we can reason, calling for at least temporary suspension of the law of non-contradiction to save from self-destruction, we can appreciate inconsistent or incoherent entities in the intersubjective and in our heads. See the paradoxes of reason, which I list in the transcript below. Destroying libraries is a form of cultural destruction because it radically reduces the potential to be right for the wrong reasons, or indeed right for the right reasons. It's an assault on freedom of thought, essential to reason and humanity, used by authoritarians to control people. An ideologue, for instance, someone waving a little red book, will happily destroy everything written about politics except things that conform, because they know everything. Mao's effort demanded people learnt its contents by heart. Only then would anyone have a bright future in his utopian communist hell on earth. Communism's nothing special. All ideologies on the authoritarian left-right spectrum, along with theocracies, behave in the same inhuman manner. all are utopian, sharing equal loathing for democracy, because it has the temerity to exist, not to frog march people along a shining path to fixed utopia, but to find out what is best to do in the circumstances. Ideologues are at war with change and use humans as cannon fodder. Democracy engages with change to make the best of things. Socrates might approve. Plato most certainly would not. If you're still here, hurrah! Thank you for your patience. It's quite a complex thing, but the more I've done philosophy or dug into it as a philosopher, the more I've realised the truth of the cliche, everything is connected to everything else. So if, for those people who think in categories, academic silos, which are necessary because no one can know everything in academia, find it very challenging to sort of leap from one silo to the next, and in many cases it's antithetical to the necessary structure to keep the institutions to preserve and promote knowledge in one piece. It's one of the paradoxes of it all. Currently, I think academia has gone mad on its silos and is sort of throttling itself, which is a real shame because academics are vital for society. Instead, they tend to be fixated on being right by definition, which sort of protects them and, for those with tenure, justifies their existence. Unfortunately, this mentality has been taught to the students, and many of the students are now in Westminster, and they are, as it were, they're cursed with closed system thinking, causing closed minds and contempt for reason and contempt for humanity, because the one thing ideology will do, if it has to, for its own preservation, is to use humans as cannon fodder. The Second World War was a perfect example of ideologues slugging it out to the death. AH didn't care a penny for the lives of German people when he ordered them to go on to the bitter end. And then later, or indeed at the same time, Stalin was equally impervious to a single drip of humanity, even to those who were taken prisoner and then sent back to Russia at the end of the war, straight to the gulags and in many cases death, for the crime of being caught alive. Yes, it is breathtaking. Every time I hear people talk about this sort of thing, it's hard to believe, but it's real. So when you come across a Labour MP, or indeed many Tory MPs, certainly most of the Greens, if not all of them, mind you, our local MP, I think, has a touch of humanity in her. She's Green, but Ellie Chance, there's humanity in her. But the Green Party as a whole, I mean, just disgusting. But ideology does that to people. Power for its own sake. Nasty business. So, the problem, or one of the paradoxes of libraries, is you've got to sort of sort out the wheat from the chaff, which is what we're doing here. Mountains of books are going to be given away. Hopefully they won't all be pulped. I think quite a few will be, but it's just one of those things. There's a limit in space, and I doubt I'll look at many of them again. But philosophical ones I'm hanging on to, despite my partner saying, well, come on, do your bit. I just can't bear to throw them away. I don't have much in the way of linguistic philosophy, because that really is the most awful rubbish. It is despicable, self-justifying, tautological, and really quite arrogant stuff. It makes my arrogance look almost sort of forgivable. Here I am dismissing towering geniuses like Strawson or Wittgenstein or someone. They're hopeless dead-enders, and they have an awful lot to answer for. So, and again, thanks for reading this. I have hope that we'll be able to deal with ideology before it deals with us, because that's the current danger. And if this country gets to the state where the currency collapses, then we could get, as Hitchens noted not so long ago. Hitchens always makes me a bit nervous, because I think there's still a bit of a Trotskyist in him, that we could end up rather like the collapse of the Soviet Union, where university professors and many of the haute bourgeois, not of course bourgeois existed in the Soviet Union, the haute bourgeois could be seen on the edge of the roads, those wretched little tables with sort of, what do you call formica type tops on them, selling household effects to buy bread. That's how much danger this country is in. It could well be that the pound will go through the floor and lose 80% of its value within 2 or 3 days. It just depends upon the judgment of the international financiers whether the damage to their own interests will be less by letting the pound just tank, or whether it's worth holding us on the tracks for a bit longer in the hope we might recover so their losses will be less. We're going to get a similar rerun, but much more serious than that in the late 70s when Callaghan had the poison chalice to deal with rampant, out of control spending of the then Labour government. But that didn't help, because that was caused, as in this case again, by Tory overspending beforehand. So the Tories presented Labour with a poison chalice in the early to middle 70s after Heath and Barber's budget particularly, to sort of throw cash around in the hope that the Keynesian solution will get there. Instead it all went to property, which was an artificial boom, and pop, it went. Here we've got huge Tory overspending, partly in COVID, but all sorts of other stuff, followed on by Starmer, who just made it a lot worse. Maybe we're already doomed at the end of the Tory period. That I'm not certain. But in the end, the lesson the population is going to learn in this country, and I think to extend me too, because I don't want this to happen. No one in their right senses do, except that we might come out of this in more of one piece than if we let it go on and on and on and on. Someone needs to put this country out of its misery so that it can resurrect, which I think we can do very quickly with determination. Another major problem, of course, is we've brought in millions of people, many of which have to be sustained. And if things get tight and food prices go through the ceiling, there's going to be some pretty ugly scenes. I don't look forward to that. And politicians who think that they can just spend happily and get away with this, I think ideology has blinkered them to that extent that they're unaware of the danger. Or if they are, then they're not only deluded and pitiful, they're extraordinarily dangerous people. Anyway, in an age where we're busily destroying libraries and reducing people's ability to understand the written word, there are many challenges, and we need to deal with it. I think we will. I think things will change, but it's going to need guts and the will to stand up and say things as they are. You can call me right-wing for that. I don't think I am, because I know that the excesses of the right wing are just as vile as excesses of the left wing. The whole thing is it's an authoritarian spectrum. It's not a political spectrum. It's a spectrum of one type of politics. Democracy is another type. Maybe there's another one also, but I haven't thought of that yet. Maybe someone can help me. Currently, it's utopianism, or fixed utopianism, as opposed to, we might call it dynamic utopianism, where we're looking to do the best in the circumstances. A utopia, as it were, ever changing, parallel with what there is now, So good politics should sort of keep aiming at that and change our aim as things change now. The idea we never get to a utopia is ludicrous because it's changing all the time also. So there's a dynamic element there. The static element being the demands of humanity are constant. It's just the means of satisfying them that constantly changes. The lack of sophistication in modern politics is just mind-blowing. But it all dates back to lack of understanding about and respect for contradiction. The age of enlightenment was only such because the dead hand of theocracy disappeared, or theological domination didn't disappear, but it reduced radically, exchanged for new religions, of course, or variations on the old religion. But they didn't get to the heart of things because they didn't understand the nature of reason. And those are in the paradoxes of reason, which I list at the bottom of the transcript. It's utterly critical. Once we understand, and the intelligentsia understands the significance and nature of the paradoxes of reason, the veil shall lift. But getting them to understand that, God, I have no idea. These people are vastly brighter than me, much more educated. My speciality is left field thinking in politics and elsewhere. I'm good at that. So I can sort of join things together that other people wouldn't do. To, as it were, make sense out of nonsense. And there's a barrel load of nonsense in this world, so the potential to do that is enormous. Anyway, thanks again, and I'll push out something in the middle of the week maybe. I've got stuff to do, domestic and bits of old car stuff to do in the meantime. Bye for now.